Welcome to Woo English. In this story, you'll learn English through clear and simple sentences. Feel free to leave comments and share your thoughts. If you enjoy the story, please press the like button to support us. It really helps. This story is for educational purposes. We aim to help you improve your English while enjoying an inspiring tale about Noah, a man of great faith and resilience. His journey offers valuable lessons about perseverance, obedience, and the importance of making wise choices. But we do not encourage or glorify any actions in the story. Let's begin the journey together. Chapter 1. The Chosen Messenger. Noah lived in a land surrounded by tall mountains and flowing rivers. The people of this land were strong and wealthy. They had farms with green fields full of crops that fed their families and animals. Their cities were busy, full of merchants trading goods from faraway places. Life seemed good and peaceful, but something was wrong. Noah was different from the people around him. He was wise and thoughtful. He loved peace and honesty and followed the teachings of God. Noah's days were spent in prayer and reflection, always seeking the right path. He treated everyone with kindness and respect, no matter who they were. Because of this, the people in his village respected him. They came to him with their problems, knowing that he would give them good advice. But as Noah walked through the city streets, he noticed changes in the people. He saw how they were turning away from God, choosing to follow their own desires instead of living the way God had taught them. He saw people lying, cheating, and treating each other unfairly. The rich grew richer by taking from the poor, and the powerful used their strength to harm the weak. The simple life of goodness and worship that Noah valued was being forgotten. Noah felt a deep sadness in his heart. He knew that the people were walking on a dangerous path. They were forgetting the purpose of their lives, and this would lead to their destruction. Noah often climbed to the top of a quiet hill outside the city, where he could be alone with his thoughts. From there, he would look down at the city and pray to God for guidance. One night, as Noah prayed under the clear, starry sky, he felt a strong presence. His heart filled with peace, and he knew that God was near. Then, in the stillness of the night, God spoke to Noah. The voice was not loud or frightening, but it was clear and powerful. God told Noah that he had chosen him to be his messenger. Noah was to go to the people and warn them about their wrong ways. God wanted to give them a chance to return to the right path before it was too late. Noah listened carefully, his heart pounding with a mix of emotions. He was honored to be chosen by God, but he also felt the heavy responsibility that came with it. Noah knew that the task ahead would not be easy. The people were stubborn, and many of them did not want to hear the truth. But Noah also knew that he could not ignore God's command. He had to try for the sake of his people and for the love of God. The next morning, Noah awoke with a renewed sense of purpose. The sun rose gently over the mountains, casting a warm light on the city below. As Noah walked through the streets, he could see the signs of corruption everywhere. People arguing, merchants cheating customers, and children learning to follow in the footsteps of their misguided elders. But Noah was not afraid. He felt a deep compassion for the people, knowing that they were lost and needed guidance. Noah began to speak to the people about God's message. He started with the elders of the city, those who were supposed to be wise and lead by example. He spoke to them about the importance of returning to the ways of goodness and justice. He reminded them of the teachings that their ancestors had followed, teachings that brought peace and prosperity to their land. At first, some of the elders listened to Noah. They knew that he was a man of wisdom and respected his words, but others laughed at him, saying that he was old-fashioned and that times had changed. They were too busy enjoying their wealth and power to worry about spiritual matters. They did not want to hear about God or about changing their ways. As the days went by, more and more people began to turn away from Noah's message. They mocked him openly, saying that he was wasting his time. But Noah did not give up. He knew that God had sent him for a reason, and he continued to preach with patience and determination. He spoke in the markets, in the streets, and even in the homes of those who would listen. He told the people that God was merciful and loving, but also just. He warned them that if they did not change their ways, there would be consequences. But the more he spoke, the more the people turned against him. Noah's family supported him, but they too began to feel the pressure from the community. People started to avoid them, and some even treated them with hostility. Noah's sons worried about their father, seeing how the people reacted to his words. But Noah reassured them, saying that God was with them and that they must have faith. One day, as Noah was preaching in the market, a group of men approached him. They were leaders in the community, wealthy and powerful. They confronted Noah in front of the crowd, trying to humiliate him. They asked him why he continued to preach when no one was listening. They accused him of trying to disrupt the peace and questioned his motives. But Noah, calm and unshaken, replied that he was only doing what God had commanded. He told them that he spoke out of love for his people, and that he wished for them to find peace and happiness through righteousness. The men laughed at Noah and walked away, leaving him alone in the market. But Noah did not feel alone. He knew that God was with him, guiding him every step of the way. As he looked around at the faces in the crowd, he saw a few who seemed to be listening, who seemed to be thinking about his words. This gave Noah hope. He knew that even if only a few people heard his message and changed their ways, it would be worth it. As the days turned into weeks, Noah continued his mission. He became a familiar figure in the city, always speaking about God's message of truth and justice. Some people began to avoid him, while others were curious and would listen from a distance. Noah's persistence began to make some people uncomfortable. They did not like being reminded of their wrongdoings. But Noah knew that his task was not to make people comfortable. It was to speak the truth. Noah spent his nights in prayer, asking God for strength and guidance. He knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but he was ready to face whatever challenges came his way. He understood that being chosen by God was both an honor and a heavy responsibility. And although he was just one man, he believed that with God's help, he could make a difference. As Noah looked out over the city one evening, the sun setting behind the mountains, he felt a deep sense of peace. He knew that his mission had just begun, and that there was much work to be done. But he also knew that he was not alone. God was with him, and with that knowledge, Noah was ready to face the challenges ahead. In the quiet of the night, Noah made a vow to himself and to God. He would not give up, no matter how hard things became. He would continue to speak the truth, to guide his people, and to fulfill the mission that God had given him. With a heart full of faith and determination, Noah prepared for the journey that lay ahead, knowing that the path of righteousness was never easy, but always worth it. Chapter 2. The Divine Command. Noah lived in a world that was slowly losing its way. Every day he watched as the people around him became more and more distant from the path of goodness and truth. They were consumed by their own desires, forgetting the teachings that had once guided them. This troubled Noah deeply, but he continued to live a life of honesty, kindness, and devotion to God. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains and the sky turned shades of orange and purple, Noah sat alone in his small home. The day had been long, filled with moments of sadness as he witnessed more signs of corruption and wrongdoing in his community. He closed his eyes, seeking peace through prayer. As he prayed, his heart filled with a deep sense of longing. He wished for his people to return to the right path, to live lives filled with justice and compassion. Suddenly, in the quietness of his home, Noah felt a presence unlike anything he had ever experienced before. His heart began to beat faster, and a deep calm settled over him. He knew that something extraordinary was about to happen. The room seemed to fill with a light that was not from this world, and in that light, Noah heard a voice. It was not a voice that could be heard with the ears, but one that spoke directly to his heart. It was the voice of God. "Noah," the voice said, gentle yet filled with authority. "I have chosen you to be my messenger. You are to warn your people of the path they are on, for they are straying far from the way of righteousness. Tell them to return to me, to live justly and with faith, or they will face the consequences of their actions." Noah listened, his heart filled with awe and reverence. He had always known that God was close, but now he felt the weight of his presence more than ever. The message was clear, but it was also heavy. Noah felt a mix of emotions, honor that God had chosen him, but also a deep fear. How would he carry out such a task? The people had already turned away from the truth. Would they listen to him now? For a moment, Noah hesitated. He thought about the difficulties he would face. The people were proud and stubborn. Many of them were powerful and wealthy, with little interest in changing their ways. What if they rejected him? What if they mocked him, or worse, tried to harm him? These thoughts swirled in Noah's mind, and for a moment he felt overwhelmed. But then, as he continued to listen to the voice of God, Noah's fear began to fade. He remembered that God was the creator of all things, the one who knew everything. If God had chosen him for this mission, then it was because God believed he could do it. Noah realized that his task was not to worry about the outcome, but to trust in God and do what was right. With a deep breath, Noah made his decision. He would obey God's command. He would speak the truth to his people, no matter how difficult it might be. He would trust that God would give him the strength and the wisdom to carry out this mission. The next morning, as the first light of dawn touched the earth, Noah prepared himself for the task ahead. He knew that this was not just an ordinary day, it was the beginning of something much greater. As he stepped outside, he felt a sense of determination. The world around him looked the same as it always did, but Noah knew that everything had changed. Noah began by visiting the elders of the city. These were the men who were supposed to be wise, the ones who led the people. Noah spoke to them with respect, but also with firmness. He told them about the message he'd received from God. He explained that the way they were living, full of dishonesty, greed, and injustice, was leading them down a dangerous path. He urged them to return to the ways of righteousness, to lead the people by example. But the elders were not interested in what Noah had to say. They listened politely at first, but it was clear that they did not believe him. Some of them even laughed at Noah, saying that he was foolish to think that the people would change. They were too comfortable in their lives of luxury and power to care about anything else. Noah's words seemed to bounce off them like stones off a wall. Despite their rejection, Noah did not give up. He knew that his task was not to convince everyone, but to deliver the message faithfully. He continued to speak to the people, moving from the markets to the streets, sharing God's warning with anyone who would listen. Some people were curious and stopped to hear what Noah had to say, but most of them simply walked away. They were too busy with their daily lives, too distracted by their own concerns to think about anything as serious as Noah's message. As the days passed, Noah's mission became harder. The more he spoke, the more resistance he faced. People began to mock him openly, calling him crazy and old-fashioned. They accused him of trying to scare them for no reason, of being out of touch with the world they lived in. Noah's heart ached, not because of the insults, but because he could see how far the people had strayed from the path of goodness. He wished that they could understand the seriousness of the situation, that they could see the danger they were in. One evening, as Noah returned home after another long day of preaching, he felt a deep sense of sorrow. He had tried so hard, but it seemed like no one was willing to listen. He wondered if he was failing in his mission. But then, as he sat in the quiet of his home, he remembered the voice of God. He remembered the feeling of peace and certainty that had filled him when he first received the command. Noah realized that he had done his part by delivering the message. The rest was in God's hands. With this thought, Noah felt his strength return. He understood that he could not control how people responded, but he could control his own actions. He could continue to speak the truth, to live a life of righteousness, and to trust that God's plan was greater than anything he could see or understand. Noah knew that his journey was just beginning, and that there would be more challenges ahead. But he was ready to face them, with faith in his heart and God's command guiding his every step. The next morning, Noah rose early, as he had done every day since receiving the divine command. He stepped outside and looked up at the sky. The sun was just beginning to rise, its light spreading across the land. In that moment, Noah felt a deep sense of peace. He knew that he was not alone. God was with him, and with that knowledge, Noah prepared to continue his mission. He would speak to his people with hope in his heart that some would listen, and with concern for those who would not. Noah was determined to fulfill the task that had been given to him, trusting in God's wisdom and mercy. And so, with renewed strength and unwavering faith, Noah set out once again to deliver God's message to his people. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but he also knew that he was not walking it alone. God had called him, and Noah would answer that call with all his heart. Chapter 3. The Warning. Noah stood at the edge of the town square, watching as people went about their daily lives. The marketplace was bustling with activity, with merchants calling out to customers, selling fruits, spices, and fabrics. Children ran through the streets, laughing and playing, while the elders sat in the shade, talking quietly. To an outsider, it might have seemed like a peaceful, thriving community. But Noah knew better. Beneath the surface, there was a darkness growing, a shadow that threatened to consume everything. Noah had been chosen by God to deliver a message to his people, a message that weighed heavily on his heart. He had seen how the people had strayed from the path of righteousness. They were no longer living according to the values of honesty, kindness, and faith that their ancestors had followed. Instead, they were focused on their own desires, forgetting the teachings that had once guided them. Noah knew that this path could only lead to destruction, and he felt a deep sorrow for his people. It was time to speak out, to warn them before it was too late. Noah took a deep breath, gathering his courage. He had been preparing for this moment, but that did not make it any easier. He knew that his message would not be well received, that many would mock him, and that some might even turn against him. But Noah also knew that he had to try, that it was his duty to deliver God's warning. Noah walked to the center of the square and raised his hands for silence. Slowly, the noise of the marketplace began to die down as people turned to see what was happening. They recognized Noah, the man who had always lived a life of peace and devotion. Some of them had gone to him for advice in the past, trusting in his wisdom. But today, Noah was not here to give advice. He was here to deliver a warning. "People of this town," Noah began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I come to you with a message from God. Our Creator, who has given us everything we have, is watching us. He sees the way we live, the choices we make, and He is not pleased. We have strayed far from the path of righteousness. We have turned away from the values that once guided us: honesty, justice, kindness, and faith. We have become a people focused only on our own desires, forgetting the one who created us." As Noah spoke, he saw the reactions of the crowd. Some listened intently, their faces serious as they took in his words. Others looked away, uncomfortable with what they were hearing. And then there were those who began to whisper to each other, laughing quietly, mocking Noah under their breath. "God is merciful," Noah continued. "He does not wish to punish us. He gives us this chance to change, to return to the right path. But if we continue on this way, ignoring His commands, there will be consequences. We cannot expect to live in peace and prosperity if we live in sin. The path we are on can only lead to destruction." A man from the crowd stepped forward, his face twisted in anger. "Why should we listen to you, Noah?" he shouted. "You're just one man. What do you know about our lives? We are doing fine as we are. Who are you to tell us that we are wrong?" Noah looked at the man, his heart heavy with sorrow. He knew that many felt the same way. They were comfortable in their lives, unwilling to see the truth. "I am not here to judge you," Noah replied calmly. I am only delivering the message that God has given me. It is not my place to tell you what to do, but it is my duty to warn you. The choice is yours, but know that the path you are on is dangerous." The man sneered and turned away, but others in the crowd were not so quick to dismiss Noah's words. Some of them looked troubled, as if Noah's message had struck a chord deep within them. They knew that there was truth in what he was saying, but admitting that would mean facing their own shortcomings, something they were not ready to do. A woman in the crowd, her face lined with worry, called out, "But Noah, what should we do? How can we change? The world is difficult, and it is hard to always do what is right." Noah's expression softened as he turned to her. "It is true that life is not easy," he said gently, "but God is always with us, guiding us if we choose to listen. We must return to the values that bring us closer to Him: honesty, kindness, fairness, and faith. We must treat each other with respect and help those who are in need. We must pray and seek God's guidance in all that we do. If we make these changes, if we return to the right path, God's mercy will be upon us." The woman nodded slowly, and Noah saw others in the crowd doing the same. He knew that his message had reached some of them, but he also knew that many still resisted. Changing their ways would not be easy, and it was not something that would happen overnight. But Noah was not discouraged. He had done what God had asked of him, and he would continue to do so, no matter how difficult the task. As the crowd began to disperse, Noah stood alone in the square, watching as people returned to their daily lives. Some walked away with serious expressions, clearly deep in thought. Others shook their heads, dismissing Noah's words as nonsense. And then there were those who laughed and joked, making fun of the crazy old man who thought he could change the world with his words. But Noah did not waver. He knew that his mission was far from over. He would continue to preach, to warn his people, because he believed in the importance of the message he carried. He knew that God's wisdom was greater than his own, and he trusted that, in time, the people would understand. In the days that followed, Noah continued to speak to anyone who would listen. He went to the homes of the elders, to the workshops of the craftsmen, to the fields where the farmers worked. He spoke to the rich and the poor, to the young and the old. His message was always the same: return to the path of righteousness before it is too late. Each time, he faced the same mixed reactions. Some listened with open hearts, others with skepticism, and many with outright rejection. But Noah remained patient. He knew that change was difficult, and that people often resisted what they feared or did not understand. One evening, as Noah sat outside his home, watching the stars appear in the night sky, he felt a deep sense of peace. He had done his best to deliver God's warning, and he would continue to do so for as long as it took. He knew that he could not control how others responded, but he could control his own actions. He would remain steadfast in his mission, trusting in God's plan. Noah's journey was just beginning, and he knew there would be many more challenges ahead. But with faith in his heart and God's command guiding him, Noah was ready to face whatever came next. He would continue to warn his people, hoping that they would listen, and praying that they would find their way back to the path of righteousness. Chapter 4: Rejection and Mockery. Noah stood in the middle of the bustling marketplace, his voice strong and clear as he delivered his message. He spoke of God's mercy and the importance of returning to the path of righteousness. He reminded the people of the consequences of their actions, urging them to change their ways before it was too late. But as he looked around, he could see that many were not listening. Some turned away, others shook their heads, and a few began to laugh. "Why should we listen to you, Noah?" a man shouted from the crowd, his voice full of scorn. "You've been saying the same thing for years, and nothing has happened. Look at us. We are doing just fine without your warnings." The crowd around the man nodded in agreement, and some even joined in the laughter. They mocked Noah, calling him a fool for believing that anything bad would happen to them. After all, they were successful, their lands were rich, and their lives were comfortable. What reason did they have to change? Noah's heart ached as he listened to their words. He did not preach to gain followers or to be admired. He spoke because he cared deeply for his people and feared for their future. But their rejection and mockery made his task all the more difficult. He felt a deep sorrow, knowing that their arrogance and pride were leading them away from the truth. Day after day, Noah continued to preach, moving from the marketplace to the city streets and even to the doorsteps of people's homes. His message was always the same: return to God, live justly, and seek forgiveness for your wrongdoings. But no matter where he went, he faced the same reactions: rejection, disbelief, and ridicule. In the workshops where craftsmen shaped metal and wood, Noah's words were met with jeers. "Noah, go find yourself something useful to do," one craftsman said with a sneer. "We are busy making a living here. We don't have time for your stories." At the farms, where the fields were green and full of crops, farmers would mock him openly. "Look at our harvest, Noah," one farmer called out. "Do you see any sign of punishment? We are blessed with abundance." You worry too much. Even in the homes of the wealthy, where Noah hoped his message might find some understanding, he was met with disdain. The rich, surrounded by their luxuries, saw no reason to listen to a man who spoke of God's displeasure. "Why should we change our ways, Noah?" one rich man said, lounging in his fine garments. "We have everything we could want. Clearly, God favors us." But despite the harsh words and the mockery, Noah did not give up. He knew that his mission was not to convince everyone, but to deliver the message that God had entrusted to him. He understood that people often rejected what they did not want to hear, especially when it challenged their way of life. But Noah also knew that he had to keep trying, for the sake of those who might still listen and change. There were moments when Noah felt the weight of his task more heavily than usual. One such moment came when a group of young men followed him through the streets, taunting him as he preached. They mimicked his words in high-pitched voices, laughing and pointing at him. They called him names and threw stones in his direction, though none of the stones hit him. "Old man, why don't you just give up?" one of them shouted. "No one cares about your warnings. You're wasting your time." Noah continued walking, his heart heavy, but his resolve unshaken. He could feel the sting of their words, but he also felt something deeper. A sadness for these young men who had grown up in a world where mockery and arrogance had become the norm. He knew that their behavior was not just an insult to him, but a sign of how far the people had strayed from the values that once held their community together. As he walked, Noah silently prayed for the strength to continue. He prayed for patience, for the ability to endure the harsh treatment without losing hope. He knew that God was with him, even in these difficult moments, and that gave him the courage to keep going. One evening, as the sun began to set and the streets grew quiet, Noah returned to his small home. He sat outside, watching the sky turn from orange to deep purple. The stars began to appear, one by one, and Noah felt a sense of peace wash over him. Despite the rejection and mockery he faced every day, he knew that he was doing what was right. He was fulfilling the mission that God had given him, and that was what mattered most. But even in this peaceful moment, Noah could not help but feel a deep concern for his people. He thought about the families he had spoken to, the children who had laughed at him, the elders who had turned away. He knew that they were living in ignorance, unaware of the danger that lay ahead if they did not change their ways. He wished he could make them see the truth, but he also knew that only they could choose to open their hearts to it. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, but the situation did not change. The more Noah preached, the more the people seemed to harden their hearts against him. The mockery grew louder and the rejection more fierce. There were times when Noah felt a deep weariness, a longing for the people to finally understand the seriousness of his message. But each time this weariness crept in, Noah reminded himself of his faith in God's wisdom. One day, as Noah was speaking in the marketplace, a small group of people approached him. These were people who had not openly mocked him, but who had also not shown any interest in his message before. They looked troubled, as if something in Noah's words had finally reached them. "Noah," one of them said quietly, "we've been thinking about what you've been saying. We don't want to believe that anything bad will happen, but what if you're right? What if we really are on the wrong path?" Noah looked at them with a mixture of hope and concern. "I do not wish for anything bad to happen to any of you," he said gently. "That is why I continue to speak, despite the rejection and the mockery. God is merciful, and He gives us chances to change. But we must be willing to take those chances. We must be willing to turn away from what is wrong and seek what is right." The group nodded slowly, and Noah could see that they were struggling with their own doubts and fears. He knew that they were at a crossroads, that the decision they made now could shape their futures. "Remember," Noah said, his voice calm but firm, "it is never too late to return to the path of righteousness. God's mercy is great, but so is His justice. I speak not to frighten you, but to guide you. The choice is yours." With that, Noah left the marketplace, leaving the group to ponder his words. As he walked home, he felt a small flicker of hope. Perhaps, finally, some of his people were beginning to understand. Noah knew that his journey was far from over. He would continue to face rejection and mockery, and the road ahead would be difficult. But he also knew that he could not give up. His faith in God's command kept him going, and his love for his people drove him to continue preaching, even when it seemed like no one was listening. As the sun set on another day, Noah looked up at the sky, his heart full of determination. He would keep speaking, keep warning, and keep hoping, because he believed in the importance of his mission. No matter how hard things became, Noah knew that he was on the right path, and that gave him the strength to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Chapter 5. The Patience of Noah. The years passed slowly for Noah. The sun rose and set, the seasons changed, and the people continued with their lives. But for Noah, each day felt like a new challenge. His mission had not changed. He was still calling his people to return to the path of righteousness, to live according to God's commands. But the more he spoke, the more resistance he faced. In the beginning, there had been a few who listened to Noah with open hearts, considering his words carefully. But as time went on, the number of those willing to listen grew smaller. The people had become more set in their ways, more determined to ignore the warnings Noah delivered. For them, life seemed good enough as it was. Why should they change? Why should they listen to someone who had been saying the same things for so many years? Noah, however, did not give up. He understood that his mission was not about immediate success, but about faithfulness to God's command. Every day, he rose with the sun and prepared himself to face whatever the day might bring. He walked through the streets, greeted the people, and spoke to them with kindness and patience. His voice remained calm, even when others shouted at him. His heart remained steady, even when others tried to shake his resolve. But it was not easy. There were times when Noah felt the weight of his task more heavily than usual. He was only human, and the constant rejection took its toll on him. Some days, as he sat alone in his small home, he would wonder if his efforts were in vain. He would ask himself if there was something more he could do, something he was missing. But then he would remember the voice of God, the command he had been given, and his resolve would return. Noah knew that patience was not just about waiting for things to change. It was about enduring hardship, remaining steadfast in the face of adversity, and continuing to do what was right, even when it seemed like no one cared. Patience, Noah realized, was a form of strength, a strength that came not from within himself, but from his faith in God. As the years went by, Noah's patience was tested in many ways. The people's mockery grew more intense. They laughed at him openly, calling him a madman, saying that he was wasting his life on foolish dreams. Some of them even tried to make his life more difficult, spreading lies about him or refusing to do business with him. They hoped that by isolating him, they could force him to give up his mission. But Noah remained calm. He did not respond to their insults or retaliate against their actions. Instead, he prayed for them, asking God to open their hearts and help them see the truth. He knew that responding with anger or frustration would only make things worse. His mission was one of peace and guidance, not conflict. One day, as Noah was speaking to a small group of people in the marketplace, a man approached him with a sneer. "Noah," the man said, "how long will you keep this up? Do you really think anyone will listen to you after all these years? Look around you. The world has not changed, and neither have we." Noah looked at the man, his eyes filled with a quiet strength. "I do not speak because I expect immediate change," he replied. "I speak because it is my duty to share the truth. It is up to each person to decide whether to listen. I trust in God's plan, and I will continue to do what I have been commanded to do, no matter how long it takes." The man laughed and walked away, but Noah remained undeterred. He understood that his mission was not about convincing everyone. It was about remaining faithful to God's command, no matter the outcome. And so, he continued to speak, day after day, year after year, with the same calm determination. Noah's patience extended beyond his interactions with the people. It was also evident in the way he lived his daily life. Despite the challenges he faced, Noah never let his frustrations affect how he treated others. He was kind to his neighbors, gentle with his family, and always ready to lend a helping hand to those in need. His life was a reflection of the values he preached: honesty, kindness, and faithfulness to God. Even in the quiet moments when he was alone with his thoughts, Noah's patience remained strong. He would sit by the river that flowed near his home, watching the water move steadily towards the sea. The river reminded him of his own journey, slow, sometimes difficult, but always moving forward, guided by a force greater than himself. In these moments of reflection, Noah found peace. He knew that he was on the right path, even if it was not an easy one. Noah's family also felt the effects of his mission. His wife and children stood by him, supporting him in his efforts, even though they, too, faced the scorn of the community. They understood the importance of Noah's work and shared his commitment to God's command. This unity within his family gave Noah additional strength. He was not alone in his mission, and that knowledge comforted him on the hardest days. Over time, some of Noah's children grew into adults, and they began to take on responsibilities of their own. They continued their father's work, speaking to the people about the importance of returning to God's path. Noah watched them with pride, grateful that they had inherited his faith and determination. Their involvement in the mission showed that Noah's patience was not just a personal virtue, it was a legacy that he was passing on to the next generation. As the years continued to pass, Noah's message began to resonate with a small but growing group of followers. These were people who had seen the futility of the world's ways and were searching for something more meaningful. They came to Noah, seeking guidance, and he welcomed them with open arms. He taught them about God's commands, about the importance of living a life of righteousness, and about the value of patience in the face of adversity. These followers became a source of hope for Noah. Their presence reminded him that his efforts were not in vain. Even if the majority of the people continued to reject his message, there were still those who were willing to listen, who were ready to change. Noah's patience had allowed him to reach these individuals, and for that, he was grateful. But even with this small group of followers, Noah knew that his mission was far from complete. The opposition he faced from the rest of the community was still strong, and the challenges he encountered were many. Yet, his patience never wavered. He continued to trust in God's plan, knowing that everything would happen in its own time. In moments of quiet reflection, Noah would think about the stories of the prophets who had come before him. They too had faced difficulties, rejection, and hardship. Yet they had remained steadfast in their missions, trusting in God's wisdom and timing. Noah found comfort in these stories, seeing them as reminders that he was not alone in his struggles. He was part of a long tradition of messengers who had been called to guide their people. And that knowledge gave him the strength to keep going. Noah's patience was not just a passive waiting. It was an active commitment to his mission, a dedication to doing what was right, no matter how difficult it became. Through his patience, Noah showed that true strength comes from faith and perseverance. He taught his followers that patience was not a sign of weakness, but a powerful force that could carry them through the hardest of times. As the sun set on another day, Noah looked out at the world with a heart full of peace. He knew that the road ahead would still be challenging, but he was ready to face it with the same patience and determination that had guided him all these years. His faith in God remained unshaken, and that faith was the foundation of his strength. Noah's journey was not over, but he was prepared for whatever lay ahead. With patience in his heart and God's command guiding his every step, Noah continued his mission, knowing that in the end, everything would unfold according to God's perfect plan. Chapter 6: The Divine Revelation. The days were long, and the nights even longer. Noah had spent years calling his people to the path of righteousness, warning them of the dangers of their ways. Yet despite his efforts, most of them continued to live as they pleased, ignoring his words. They laughed at him, mocked his message, and refused to believe that anything would change. But Noah remained steadfast, holding on to his faith in God's wisdom. One night, as Noah sat alone in his small home, the air was still, and the stars shone brightly in the clear sky. He was deep in prayer, seeking comfort and guidance from God. His heart was heavy with concern for his people, and he prayed for their salvation. As he prayed, a deep peace settled over him, and he felt the presence of God more strongly than ever before. Suddenly, in the quiet of the night, God spoke to Noah. It was not a voice that could be heard with the ears, but one that resonated deep within his soul. The message was clear and powerful, filling Noah with both awe and fear. "Noah," God said, "the time has come. The earth is filled with corruption and wrongdoing. The people have turned away from my guidance, and they have persisted in their sinful ways despite the warnings. I have decided to cleanse the earth of this corruption. A great flood will come, and it will cover the earth, washing away the wickedness that has spread across the land." Noah's heart pounded in his chest as he listened to God's words. He had known that the people's actions would lead to consequences, but hearing it from God filled him with a profound sense of sorrow. He thought of the families in his community, the children who played in the streets, the farmers who tended their fields. The thought of their lives being swept away by a great flood was almost too much to bear. Yet, alongside his sorrow, Noah also felt a sense of relief. For years, he had watched as corruption and injustice grew unchecked. The powerful oppressed the weak, and the rich took advantage of the poor. No one seemed to care about right or wrong anymore. The idea that God's justice would finally be served brought a measure of comfort to Noah's troubled heart. But there was no time to dwell on these emotions. God had more to say. "Noah," God continued, "you must build an ark. It will be a great vessel, large enough to carry you, your family, and pairs of every living creature on earth. The ark will be your refuge when the floodwaters rise. I will guide you in this task, and you must follow my instructions carefully. The flood will come, and only those who are in the ark will be saved." Noah listened intently, committing every word to memory. The task before him was monumental, but he did not hesitate. He knew that God's commands were always for the best, even when they seemed difficult or overwhelming. He also knew that his time was limited. The flood would come, and he needed to be ready. As the divine revelation came to an end, Noah remained kneeling in prayer, his heart full of mixed emotions. He felt sorrow for the destruction that was to come, but also a deep sense of purpose. God had chosen him for this task, and he would do everything in his power to fulfill it. The next morning, as the first light of dawn crept over the mountains, Noah began to prepare for his new mission. He gathered his family and shared with them the revelation he had received. They listened with wide eyes, understanding the gravity of the situation. They, too, felt the weight of what was to come. But they trusted Noah and, more importantly, they trusted God. Noah knew that building the ark would be no small task. It would require time, effort, and resources. The ark had to be large enough to carry not only his family, but also pairs of every kind of animal on earth. It would need to withstand the powerful floodwaters that were to come. But Noah was determined. He began by selecting a suitable location, a flat piece of land where the ark could be constructed. The work was slow and painstaking. Noah and his sons labored from sunrise to sunset, cutting down trees, shaping the wood, and assembling the massive structure. The ark began to take shape, its size and scale becoming more apparent with each passing day. It was unlike anything the people of the town had ever seen. As the ark grew, so did the curiosity of the townspeople. They came to watch, gathering in groups to see what Noah was doing. At first, they were puzzled. Why would Noah, the man who had spent years preaching about God's wrath, suddenly start building a giant boat in the middle of dry land? It made no sense to them. But as the days turned into weeks, and the ark continued to grow, their puzzlement turned to mockery. They laughed at Noah, pointing and jeering as they passed by. "Noah has truly lost his mind," they said. "He's building a boat in the desert. What a fool." Some of them tried to reason with Noah, hoping to bring him back to what they considered reality. "Noah," one man said, "why are you doing this? There is no flood coming. You've been saying the same thing for years, and nothing has happened. Stop this madness and come back to your senses." But Noah remained focused on his task. He knew that the people did not understand, and he did not expect them to. His mission was not to argue with them or convince them of the truth. His mission was to obey God's command and prepare for the flood that would come, whether they believed it or not. Despite the mockery and rejection, Noah's resolve did not waver. He worked tirelessly, day after day, trusting in God's guidance. As the ark neared completion, Noah began to gather the animals, just as God had instructed. Pairs of every kind of animal, birds, beasts, and creatures that crawled on the ground, were brought to the ark. It was a sight to behold. Animals of all shapes and sizes coming together, as if guided by an unseen hand. The townspeople watched in amazement as the animals entered the ark 2 by 2. Some of them began to wonder if there might be some truth to Noah's warnings after all. But most of them remained stubborn, unwilling to believe that their comfortable lives could be disrupted by something as unimaginable as a flood. As the final touches were made to the ark, Noah took a moment to stand back and look at what he and his family had accomplished. The ark was massive, a testament to their hard work and faith. But Noah knew that the real test was yet to come. The floodwaters would rise, and the ark would be their only refuge. He felt a deep sense of responsibility, not only for his family, but also for the animals that had been entrusted to his care. Noah's heart was heavy as he thought about the people who had rejected his message. He had tried to warn them, to help them see the danger they were in, but they had refused to listen. Now, all he could do was pray for them and hope that, in the end, God's mercy would be upon them. With the ark complete and the animals safely inside, Noah knew that the time was drawing near. The sky was still clear, and the sun still shone brightly, but Noah felt a shift in the air, a subtle change that signaled the approach of something great and terrible. As Noah stood by the entrance of the ark, he looked out at the world one last time. The people, the land, the sky, it would all soon be washed away by the floodwaters. But in his heart, Noah knew that this was not the end. It was a new beginning, a chance for the earth to be cleansed and renewed. With a deep breath, Noah prepared himself for what was to come. The ark was ready, and so was Noah. He had done everything that God had commanded, and now all that was left was to wait. Wait for the first drop of rain, the first sign of the flood that would change the world forever. Noah's heart was full of mixed emotions, sorrow for the coming destruction, but also a quiet relief that justice would finally be served. As he stepped inside the ark and closed the door behind him, Noah whispered a prayer of thanks. He had fulfilled his mission, and now he placed his trust entirely in God's hands. The flood was coming, but Noah was ready. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the life of Alexander the Great here on WooEnglish. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and comment. Your feedback means a lot to us and helps us bring you more inspiring content. Chapter 7. Building the Ark. The morning sun cast long shadows across the land as Noah stood before the massive pile of wood that had been gathered for the ark. The task before him was enormous, but his heart was filled with determination. God had given him a command, and Noah was ready to obey, no matter how difficult the journey ahead would be. With a few faithful followers by his side, men who believed in his message and were willing to help, Noah began the monumental task of building the ark. These men were strong and dedicated, but even they were daunted by the size of the project. The ark would be a colossal vessel, large enough to hold Noah, his family, and pairs of every living creature on earth. It would need to be sturdy and watertight, capable of surviving the coming flood. The work began with the preparation of the wood. The trees that had been felled needed to be cut into planks and beams, each piece carefully measured and shaped. This was labor-intensive work, requiring strength and precision. The men used simple tools, axes, saws, and hammers, to shape the wood, their muscles straining with each swing. Noah worked alongside them, his hands rough from the labor, his back bent from the effort. But he did not complain. Instead, he found strength in his faith, knowing that each plank he placed, each nail he hammered, was bringing him one step closer to fulfilling God's command. As the days turned into weeks, the ark began to take shape. Its massive frame rose from the ground, a testament to the hard work and dedication of Noah and his followers. The size of the ark was astonishing, far larger than any boat or ship that had ever been built. It towered over the landscape, its wooden ribs like the bones of some great beast. But as the ark grew, so did the curiosity and the scorn of the people in the town. They gathered to watch the construction, their expressions a mix of amusement and disbelief. What was Noah doing? Why was he building such a massive structure in the middle of dry land? The questions turned into mockery as the townspeople began to jeer and taunt Noah and his men. "Look at the fool, building a boat in the desert," one man shouted, his voice full of laughter. "What's the point, Noah?" another called out. "There's no water here. Are you planning to float your ark on sand?" The laughter echoed around the construction site, but Noah remained focused on his work. He knew that these people did not understand. They could not see the danger that was coming, the flood that would wash away their comfortable lives. Noah's heart ached for them, but he also knew that he could not let their words distract him from his task. Despite the ridicule, Noah's followers continued to work with determination. They, too, felt the sting of the townspeople's words, but their faith in God and in Noah's mission gave them the strength to carry on. Together, they lifted heavy beams into place, secured them with nails, and coated the wood with pitch to make it waterproof. The ark was not just a vessel, it was a refuge, a sanctuary that would protect them from the coming storm. The work was exhausting, and the days were long. The sun beat down on them during the day, and the cold crept in at night. Their hands were blistered, their bodies sore, but they did not stop. Each day brought them closer to completion, and each day they prayed for the strength to continue. As the ark grew, so did the complexity of the work. They had to ensure that every part of the ark was perfectly constructed, that it would not leak or break under the pressure of the floodwaters. They built compartments inside the ark to house the animals, making sure that there was enough space for each pair and that the structure was stable and secure. Noah often found himself deep in thought as he worked, his mind focused on the task at hand, but also on the responsibility that weighed heavily on his shoulders. He was building this ark not just for himself and his family, but for all of creation. Every nail he hammered, every plank he placed, was a step toward saving the world from destruction. There were moments of doubt, moments when the sheer magnitude of the task seemed overwhelming. But in those moments, Noah turned to God in prayer. He asked for guidance, for the strength to continue, and for the patience to endure the mockery of the people around him. And each time, he felt a sense of peace, a reassurance that he was on the right path. The townspeople, meanwhile, continued to mock Noah. They would come in groups, laughing and pointing at the growing ark, making jokes about how Noah had lost his mind. "Noah, have you seen a single drop of rain?" they would ask, their voices dripping with sarcasm. Why do you waste your time on this foolish project? But Noah did not respond to their taunts. He knew that arguing with them would accomplish nothing. Instead, he focused on his work, trusting that God's plan would unfold in its own time. He knew that one day the rains would come, and when they did, the people would understand. But by then, it would be too late. As the months passed, the ark neared completion. Its massive structure now stood fully formed, a towering monument to Noah's faith and perseverance. The townspeople could no longer ignore it. The ark was impossible to miss, a constant reminder of Noah's warnings. Yet, despite its imposing presence, most of them continued to scoff, refusing to believe that a flood could ever come. Noah, however, was not discouraged. He knew that his work was almost done, and that soon the time would come to gather his family and the animals and enter the ark. He could feel the tension in the air, the sense that something momentous was about to happen. The sky was still clear, the land still dry, but Noah knew that it would not stay that way for long. In the final days of construction, Noah and his followers worked with renewed urgency. They double-checked every part of the ark, ensuring that it was ready to face the flood. They gathered supplies, food, water, and everything they would need to survive during the days and nights inside the ark. As the last nails were hammered into place and the final touches were made, Noah stood back to admire the ark. It was a magnificent sight, its massive form looming against the sky. But more than its size or strength, what filled Noah with pride was the fact that he had done what God had commanded him to do. He had completed the task that had been set before him, despite the difficulties, despite the mockery, despite the doubts. Noah knew that the ark was not just a physical structure. It was a symbol of his faith, his obedience, and his trust in God. It represented the hope that even in the face of destruction, there could be salvation for those who followed the right path. The day came when the ark was finally complete. Noah gathered his followers around him, and they all stood together, looking at the great vessel they had built. There was a sense of accomplishment in the air, but also a sense of foreboding. They knew that the time was near, that soon the rains would come, and the world would be changed forever. Noah's heart was heavy as he thought about the people who had mocked him, who had refused to listen to his warnings. He had tried to save them, to help them see the truth, but they had chosen their own path. Now, all he could do was pray for them and trust that God's will would be done. As the sun set on the final day of construction, Noah stood before the ark, his heart filled with a mix of emotions, sorrow for what was to come, but also a deep sense of peace. He had done everything he could, and now he placed his faith entirely in God's hands. The ark was ready, and so was Noah. The flood was coming, and soon the world would be cleansed. But inside the ark, there would be hope, a chance for a new beginning. And Noah knew that whatever happened next, he had fulfilled his mission with faith and perseverance. Chapter 8. The Final Warning. The ark stood tall and imposing, its massive wooden frame now complete. It was a sight to behold, a structure unlike any other, built not by the hands of skilled shipbuilders, but by the faith and perseverance of Noah and his small band of followers. The work was done, and now there was only one task left for Noah: to deliver his final warning to the people. Noah had spent years preaching to his people, urging them to turn away from their sinful ways and return to the path of righteousness. He had spoken with patience, with kindness, and with a heart full of concern for their well-being. But time and again, his words had been ignored, mocked, and rejected. Now, as he prepared to speak to them one last time, there was an urgency in his heart that he could not ignore. Noah knew that the flood was imminent. God had revealed to him that the time of judgment was near, and soon the rain would begin to fall. The thought filled him with both sorrow and determination. He did not want to see his people perish. He wanted them to be saved. But he also knew that they had been given every opportunity to repent, and now this was their final chance. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the ark and the surrounding land, Noah walked to the center of the town. The people were going about their usual activities, seemingly unaware of the danger that was so close. Children played in the streets, merchants sold their goods in the marketplace, and the elders sat in the shade, discussing the events of the day. It was a scene of normalcy, but Noah knew that it would soon be shattered. Noah raised his voice, calling out to the people. "My people, listen to me!" he shouted, his voice strong and clear. The crowd began to gather, drawn by the urgency in his tone. They recognized Noah, of course. They had seen him many times before, standing in this same spot, delivering the same message. But there was something different about him today. There was a desperation in his voice that made them stop and listen, if only for a moment. "This is your final warning," Noah said, his eyes sweeping over the crowd. "The flood is coming, just as I have told you. The rain will fall, and the waters will rise, and everything that you know will be swept away. But there is still time. God is merciful, and He offers you one last chance to repent. Turn away from your sins, seek forgiveness, and come aboard the ark. It is your only refuge." The people listened in silence as Noah spoke, but their expressions were unchanged. They had heard these words before, and they did not believe them. To them, Noah was just a madman, obsessed with his visions of doom. They could not see the truth in his words, and they did not feel the fear that should have gripped their hearts. A man in the crowd, one of the town's leaders, stepped forward and sneered. "Noah, you've been saying the same thing for years," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Where is this flood you keep talking about? The sky is clear, the sun is shining, and there's not a drop of rain to be seen. You're wasting your time and ours." The crowd murmured in agreement, some laughing openly at Noah's words. They were confident in their belief that nothing would happen, that life would continue as it always had. But Noah did not falter. He knew that the truth was not determined by what they believed. It was determined by God's will, and God had made His decision. "I beg you," Noah said, his voice thick with emotion, "do not ignore this warning. I speak not to frighten you, but to save you. The flood will come, and when it does, it will be too late to change your minds. Please, for the sake of your families, for the sake of your own lives, listen to me." But the people were unmoved. They turned away from Noah, returning to their conversations, their laughter, their games. Some shook their heads in pity, while others whispered to each other, mocking Noah's desperation. To them, he was just a man clinging to a foolish belief, unable to accept the reality that the world would continue as it always had. Noah watched them with a heavy heart. He had done everything he could to warn them, to guide them back to the path of righteousness. He had spoken with love, with patience, with urgency, but still, they refused to listen. Now, he could do nothing more. The choice was theirs, and they had made it. As the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky, Noah turned and walked back toward the ark. His followers were waiting for him, their faces solemn. They too had seen the people's reactions, and they understood what it meant. The time had come to prepare for the flood. As Noah reached the ark, he looked up at the sky. The stars were beginning to appear, twinkling faintly against the darkening heavens. But as he watched, something changed. A cloud, dark and heavy, began to form on the horizon. It was the first cloud Noah had seen in days, and its presence filled him with a deep sense of foreboding. The wind began to pick up, rustling the leaves on the trees and stirring the dust on the ground. Noah could feel the change in the air, the tension that signaled the coming storm. He knew that this was the beginning, the first sign that the flood was near. Noah gathered his family and his followers, and they began the final preparations. They brought the animals aboard the ark, guiding them into the compartments that had been prepared for them. They loaded the supplies, food, water, everything they would need to survive during the days and nights to come. As they worked, the sky grew darker, the clouds gathering in thick, ominous masses. The wind grew stronger, howling through the trees and whipping at their clothes. The atmosphere was charged with an electric energy, a sense that something great and terrible was about to unfold. Noah felt a deep sadness as he looked out at the town, now shrouded in darkness. He thought of the people who had refused to listen, who had laughed at his warnings and turned away from the truth. He wished that they could see what he saw, that they could feel the urgency that gripped his heart. But he knew that their hearts were closed, their minds made up. As the last of the animals were safely aboard, Noah and his family entered the ark. The massive door was closed behind them, sealing them inside. The sound of the wind was muffled by the thick wooden walls, but Noah could still hear it, a low, constant roar that filled the air. Inside the ark, there was a tense silence. The animals were quiet, as if they, too, sensed the coming storm. Noah's family huddled together, their faces pale with fear and anticipation. They knew that they were safe inside the ark, but the knowledge of what was to come weighed heavily on their hearts. Noah knelt in prayer, asking God for strength, for protection, and for mercy. He prayed not only for those inside the ark, but also for those outside, those who had chosen to ignore the warning. He prayed that God's will would be done, whatever the outcome. As he prayed, the first drops of rain began to fall. They were small at first, barely noticeable against the dark wood of the ark. But soon, the rain grew heavier, pounding against the roof and walls, a relentless torrent that echoed through the silence. Noah looked up, his heart filled with both sorrow and relief. The flood had begun. The time of waiting was over, and now all that was left was to trust in God's plan. The ark creaked and groaned as the rain continued to fall, the sound of the storm growing louder with each passing moment. But inside, Noah felt a deep peace. He had done everything he could, and now he placed his faith entirely in God's hands. The storm would rage, the floodwaters would rise, but inside the ark there was hope, a hope that would carry them through the darkest of days. Chapter 9. The Animals Gather. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden hue over the land as Noah stood before the ark, taking a moment to catch his breath. The ark, towering and strong, was nearly ready. But there was one crucial task left: gathering the animals. God had commanded Noah to bring pairs of every kind of creature into the ark, so that they would be safe from the coming flood and would live to repopulate the earth once the waters receded. Noah knew this task would not be easy, but he trusted in God's plan. He had seen how God had guided him through every step of building the ark, providing him with strength and wisdom beyond his own. Now, he believed that God would also help him gather the animals. As the last rays of sunlight filtered through the clouds, Noah began to pray. He asked for God's guidance and for the creatures of the earth to come as they had been commanded. As he prayed, a deep sense of peace settled over him, and he felt the presence of God more strongly than ever before. Then, as if in response to his prayer, the air around Noah began to change. There was a stillness, a quiet that seemed to spread across the land. The usual sounds of the day, the chirping of birds, the rustling of leaves, faded away, replaced by an almost eerie silence. Noah looked up, and in the distance he saw movement. At first, it was just a few shapes, small and indistinct against the horizon. But as they drew closer, Noah realized what he was seeing. Animals of all shapes and sizes were making their way toward the ark. They came in pairs, just as God had commanded, and their arrival was nothing short of miraculous. Noah watched in awe as the first pair approached. Two majestic lions, their golden manes gleaming in the fading light. They walked side by side, their movements graceful yet powerful. There was no hesitation in their steps. They seemed to know exactly where they were going. As they reached the ark, they paused for a moment, their eyes meeting Noah's before they continued inside, guided by some unseen force. Behind them came other animals, each pair more incredible than the last. Two tall giraffes, their long necks swaying gently as they walked. A pair of elephants, their massive feet making the ground tremble slightly with each step. Two zebras, their black and white stripes contrasting sharply against the green of the fields. Birds of every kind filled the sky, their wings beating in unison as they descended toward the ark. There were doves and sparrows, eagles and hawks, each pair finding its place in the great vessel. They landed gracefully, their calls echoing in the still air, as if they were singing a song of praise. Noah's heart swelled with emotion as he watched the procession. It was as if the whole of creation had come to witness this moment, as if the animals themselves understood the importance of what was happening. There was something both awe-inspiring and humbling about it, a reminder of the power and wisdom of God. But there was also a sense of foreboding, a reminder that this gathering was not just a celebration, but a preparation for something grave and serious. The animals seemed to sense the approaching storm, their movements purposeful, yet subdued. Even the wildest of creatures, wolves, bears, and tigers, walked calmly, without a trace of their usual aggression. It was as if they knew that in this moment they were all part of something greater, something that required unity and peace. As the animals continued to arrive, Noah's sons helped guide them into the ark, ensuring that each pair found its place. The ark, with its many compartments, had been carefully designed to accommodate every creature. There was space for the birds, high up near the roof, where they could perch and feel safe. The larger animals were placed in the lower levels, where they could move freely without disturbing the others. Noah's wife and daughters-in-law worked tirelessly to ensure that the animals were comfortable. They laid down straw for bedding, filled troughs with water, and distributed food. Despite the enormity of the task, there was a calm efficiency to their work, as if they, too, were guided by a force greater than themselves. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the sky darkened, and the first stars began to appear. But the gathering of animals continued, illuminated now by the soft glow of the moon. A pair of deer, their eyes wide and alert, trotted gracefully into the ark. Behind them came a pair of wolves, their fur gleaming silver in the moonlight. The wolves glanced at the deer as they passed, but there was no hostility in their gaze, only a shared understanding that for now they were not enemies. Noah marveled at the harmony that had descended upon the creatures. In the ark, predators and prey lay side by side, their usual instincts subdued by the overwhelming presence of God's command. It was as if the natural order had been temporarily suspended, replaced by a divine peace that enveloped them all. But even in this peace, Noah could not shake the sense of urgency that gripped his heart. He knew that the time was short, that the flood would soon begin. The gathering of the animals was a sign, a final preparation for the storm that would cleanse the earth. Noah felt a deep sorrow for those outside the ark, for the people who had refused to listen to his warnings. They had been given a chance to repent, to join him in the ark, but they had chosen their own path. As the last of the animals entered the ark, Noah stood at the entrance, his hand resting on the door. He looked out at the land, now shrouded in darkness, and felt the weight of what was to come. The sky, which had been clear just hours before, was now filled with dark clouds, swirling ominously in the distance. The wind had picked up, rustling the leaves in the trees, and carrying with it the scent of rain. Noah knew that this was the moment. The animals were gathered, the ark was ready, and now all that remained was to close the door and wait for the rain to begin. He turned to his family, who stood beside him, their faces solemn but resolute. Together, they had worked tirelessly to prepare for this day, and now they placed their trust entirely in God. With a heavy heart, Noah reached for the door and began to close it. The sound of the heavy wood sliding into place echoed through the night, a final, decisive sound that signaled the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. As the door shut with a solid thud, Noah felt a deep sense of finality. The world outside was now closed off, and inside the ark they were safe, safe from the storm, safe from the flood, and safe in the knowledge that they had followed God's command. Inside the ark, there was a profound silence. The animals, sensing the gravity of the moment, remained quiet, their breaths soft and steady. Noah and his family huddled together, their hearts filled with a mix of emotions: relief, sorrow, and anticipation. They knew that the coming days would be difficult, but they also knew that they were part of something much greater than themselves. As the first drops of rain began to fall, tapping softly on the roof of the ark, Noah closed his eyes and offered a silent prayer. He prayed for strength, for guidance, and for the safety of his family and the creatures entrusted to his care. He prayed for the world outside, for those who had chosen to ignore the warning, and he prayed for the future, for the day when the floodwaters would recede and the earth would be renewed. The rain grew heavier, its rhythm steady and unrelenting. But inside the ark there was peace, a peace that came from knowing that they had done everything they could, and now the rest was in God's hands. The animals were gathered, the door was shut, and the storm had begun. But inside the ark there was hope, a hope that would carry them through the darkest of days and into a new beginning. Chapter 10. The Great Flood. The sky had grown dark, filled with heavy clouds that churned ominously overhead. Inside the ark, Noah and his family huddled together, listening to the increasing roar of the wind outside. The animals were quiet, sensing the tension in the air, their usual restlessness replaced by a calm that seemed almost unnatural. The first drops of rain had begun to fall, soft at first, then faster, harder, until it felt as though the heavens had opened up entirely. Noah stood near one of the small windows of the ark, peering out into the storm. The world outside had changed in an instant. The land that had been dry and firm just hours before was now quickly turning into a muddy mess. The rain pounded the earth relentlessly, creating streams and rivers where there had been none. It was as if the earth itself was being washed away, cleansed by the waters that were now rising at an alarming rate. The sound of the rain was deafening, a constant drumming that filled the air. Noah could barely hear anything else, just the endless cascade of water hitting the roof and walls of the ark. He could feel the ark shifting slightly, the weight of the water beginning to lift it from the ground. The realization that the moment had come filled Noah with both awe and a deep sense of sorrow. He knew that outside, in the midst of the storm, there were people who had refused to believe in the warnings he had given them. They had laughed at him, mocked him, and now they were facing the reality of their choices. As the water began to rise, flooding the streets and fields, panic would have set in. People would have run for higher ground, seeking safety wherever they could find it. But Noah knew that it would not be enough. The rain continued to pour down in sheets, turning the world into a blur of water and darkness. The ground beneath the ark became soft, the soil giving way as the water soaked into it. The ark groaned and creaked as it lifted off the ground, carried by the rising floodwaters. Noah felt the ark sway slightly, a slow, steady motion that signaled the beginning of their journey. Noah's family gathered around him, their faces pale but resolute. They had prepared for this moment, but the reality of it was still overwhelming. The ark, now fully afloat, moved gently with the current, the water rising higher and higher until the land outside was completely submerged. The world they had known, the town where they had lived was disappearing beneath the water. Inside the ark, there was an eerie calm. The noise of the storm was muffled by the thick wooden walls, creating a cocoon of safety around them. The animals, too, remained calm, as if they understood that they were being protected from the chaos outside. But Noah knew that the storm was far from over. The rain would continue to fall, the waters would continue to rise, and soon the entire earth would be covered by the flood. As the ark drifted on the rising waters, Noah's thoughts turned to the people who had refused to listen to him. He imagined them now, struggling against the flood, their fear turning to desperation as they realized that there was no escape. They would pound on doors, cling to trees, try to climb to the highest points they could find, but the water would keep rising, higher and higher, until there was nowhere left to go. Noah closed his eyes, his heart heavy with sorrow. He had tried to save them, to warn them of what was to come, but they had made their choice. Now, all he could do was pray for them, for their souls, and for the mercy of God. He prayed that in their final moments, they would find the strength to turn to God, to seek forgiveness, even as the waters closed in around them. The ark continued to rise, lifted by the floodwaters that now covered everything in sight. The mountains, the trees, the buildings, all were swallowed by the relentless tide. The world outside was a vast, endless sea, stretching out in every direction. There was no land in sight, no sign of the world that had once been. It was as if the earth itself had been erased, leaving nothing but water and sky. Inside the ark, Noah and his family settled into a routine. They cared for the animals, fed them, and ensured that everything was in order. The days passed slowly, the constant motion of the ark a reminder that they were adrift in a world that had been completely transformed. The rain continued to fall, though Noah knew that it could not last forever. Eventually, the storm would pass, and the waters would begin to recede. But until then, they would remain inside the ark, waiting for the sign that it was safe to leave. Noah spent much of his time in prayer, seeking comfort and strength from God. He knew that they were being protected, that the ark was a symbol of God's mercy, a refuge from the destruction that had befallen the earth. But he also knew that their journey was not over. They would have to rebuild, to start anew once the floodwaters had receded. The thought of that future, of the challenges that lay ahead, filled Noah with a sense of purpose. He was ready to face whatever came next, knowing that God was with him every step of the way. As the rain finally began to slow, Noah felt a sense of relief. The storm was beginning to pass, and soon the waters would begin to go down. The ark would find a resting place, and they would step out into a new world, a world that had been cleansed and renewed by the flood. But for now, they remained adrift, floating on the endless sea, waiting for the sign that it was time to begin again. The final days of the storm were quieter, the rain now a steady drizzle rather than a torrential downpour. Noah could feel the ark settling as the waters began to stabilize. The sense of urgency that had filled the air at the beginning of the flood was now replaced by a deep, calm resolve. They had survived the worst of the storm, and now they were ready to face whatever came next. Noah gathered his family together, and they knelt in prayer, giving thanks for their safety and for the protection that the ark had provided. They prayed for guidance, for strength, and for the wisdom to rebuild the world in a way that honored God's commands. As they prayed, Noah felt a sense of peace wash over him, a reassurance that they were not alone, that God was with them, guiding them through the darkest of times. The ark floated gently on the water, a solitary vessel in a vast, endless sea. The world outside was silent. The storm had passed, and now there was only the quiet, steady rhythm of the waves. Noah knew that their journey was far from over, but he also knew that they were ready for whatever lay ahead. As the first light of dawn broke through the clouds, casting a soft glow over the water, Noah looked out at the horizon. The sky was clear, the storm had passed, and a new day was beginning. The ark, their refuge in the midst of the flood, floated calmly on the sea, a symbol of hope and renewal. And Noah knew, with a deep sense of certainty, that they would emerge from the flood stronger, ready to build a new world, guided by the wisdom and mercy of God. Chapter 11. A New Beginning. The ark floated gently on a vast, endless sea, its sturdy frame swaying with the movement of the water. Inside, Noah and his family waited in a quiet, reflective silence. The torrential rain had finally stopped, and for the first time in many days, there was calm. The constant drumming of rain on the roof had ceased, replaced by the soothing sound of waves lapping against the sides of the ark. Noah stood by a small window, looking out at the serene water that stretched out as far as the eye could see. The sky, once filled with dark, churning clouds, was now a soft blue, with only a few wisps of white cloud remaining. The sun, warm and golden, shone down on the water, creating a sparkling path of light that danced on the surface. It was a peaceful sight, a stark contrast to the storm that had raged for so long. Noah's heart was filled with gratitude. He knew that God had protected them through the storm, keeping them safe inside the ark while the world outside was washed clean. The rain had stopped, and now the waters would begin to recede. But Noah also knew that their journey was not yet over. They had to wait for the water to go down, for land to reappear, so they could step out and begin anew. The days that followed were filled with a quiet hope. Each morning, Noah would rise early, climb to the highest point of the ark, and look out at the horizon, searching for any sign of land. His family and the animals waited patiently, knowing that it would take time for the floodwaters to fully recede. But there was a sense of optimism in the air, a belief that they were nearing the end of their long and difficult journey. Noah's sons worked alongside him, taking care of the animals, ensuring that everything was in order. The ark had become their home, a place of safety and comfort in the midst of the great flood. They were thankful for the refuge it provided, but they also longed to set foot on solid ground once more. They dreamed of seeing trees and grass, of feeling the earth beneath their feet, and of breathing in the fresh air of a new world. As the days turned into weeks, Noah continued to send out birds to search for land. He would release a dove or a raven from the ark, watching as it flew off into the distance, hoping that it would return with a sign that the waters were receding. Each time, he waited with bated breath, praying for good news. One day, after what felt like an eternity of waiting, a dove returned to the ark with a small olive branch in its beak. Noah's heart leaped with joy at the sight. The olive branch was a symbol of hope, a sign that the floodwaters were finally going down and that dry land was not far away. Noah's family rejoiced at the news. their spirits lifted by the promise of a new beginning. But still, they waited. Noah knew that they could not rush this process. The land needed time to dry, to become firm enough to support them and the animals. Patience was necessary, even as their excitement grew with each passing day. Finally, after many more days had passed, the ark began to slow in its movements. The swaying and rocking that had been a constant part of their lives for so long grew less pronounced, until one day the ark came to a gentle stop. Noah felt a subtle shift beneath his feet, as if the ark had found something solid beneath the water. With cautious hope, Noah climbed to the top of the ark and looked out. In the distance, he could see the outline of mountains rising above the water. The ark had come to rest on the slopes of one of these mountains. It was a moment of great relief and joy for Noah and his family. After all the time they had spent adrift, they had finally found land. The sight of the mountains filled Noah with a deep sense of peace. He knew that this was where God had guided them, that this was the place where they would begin again. The waters continued to recede, slowly but surely, revealing more and more of the land around them. The tops of trees began to appear, followed by hills and valleys, all fresh and new, cleansed by the great flood. Noah and his family gathered together on the deck of the ark, their eyes filled with wonder as they took in the sight of the emerging world. It was as if the earth itself had been reborn, renewed by the waters that had once covered it. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of fresh earth and growing plants. It was a world of possibilities, a blank canvas on which they could paint a new future. Noah knew that their task now was to rebuild, to create a life in this new world that honored the lessons they had learned. The flood had been a time of trial and purification, but now it was a time for growth and renewal. They would plant crops, raise animals, and build homes, creating a community that would live in harmony with God's will. As they prepared to leave the ark, Noah gathered his family and led them in a prayer of thanks. They knelt together, offering their gratitude to God for his protection and guidance. They prayed for wisdom and strength as they set out on this new journey, asking for God's blessing on the land they would soon call home. The door of the ark was opened, and for the first time in many days, Noah and his family stepped outside. The ground was firm beneath their feet, the air fresh and invigorating. The animals followed, stepping cautiously out into the new world, their eyes wide with curiosity. Noah took a deep breath, feeling the cool breeze on his face, and smiled. This was the beginning of something new, a chance to start over, to build a life that honored God's commandments. The challenges ahead would be many, but Noah knew that with faith, they could overcome them. As the sun set on their first day in the new world, casting a warm golden light over the mountains and valleys, Noah stood with his family and looked out at the land that stretched before them. It was a land of promise, a land where they could create a future filled with hope and peace. The ark had brought them safely through the storm, and now it was time to leave it behind and embrace the new beginning that lay before them. With hearts full of gratitude and hope, Noah and his family stepped forward, ready to begin the next chapter of their journey, guided by their faith and strengthened by the lessons of the past. Chapter 12. The Covenant. The sun had fully risen in the sky, casting its warm rays across the freshly uncovered earth. The air was crisp and filled with the scent of damp soil and growing plants. Noah, his family, and the animals had finally left the ark, stepping onto the solid ground that was now dry after the long, enduring flood. It was a new world, clean and renewed, a world ready to begin again. Noah stood quietly, taking in the beauty of the landscape before him. The mountains in the distance were majestic, their peaks shining in the morning light. The valleys were green with fresh grass, and the rivers that had once overflowed were now calm, their waters clear and pure. It was as if the earth itself had been reborn, ready to be filled with life once more. As Noah looked around, his heart filled with gratitude. They had survived the flood, and now they had been given a second chance, a chance to live in a way that honored God's commands, to rebuild and flourish in this new world. But before they could begin, Noah knew there was something important that needed to happen. Noah gathered his family around him, and they built an altar from stones they found on the ground. It was a simple structure, but it was built with love and reverence. They placed offerings on the altar, gifts of thanksgiving to God for his protection and mercy. As the smoke from the offerings rose into the sky, Noah led his family in prayer, their voices united in praise and gratitude. As they prayed, the sky above them began to change. A gentle breeze stirred the air, and the clouds that had lingered since the end of the flood began to part. Noah looked up, and what he saw took his breath away. A rainbow, brilliant and colorful, stretched across the sky, arching from one end of the horizon to the other. Its colors were vivid, a perfect arc of red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet, glowing against the blue sky. Noah felt a deep sense of peace and awe as he gazed at the rainbow. He knew that this was no ordinary rainbow. It was a sign from God, a message of hope and promise. God was speaking to him, to his family, and to all of creation. In that moment, Noah heard God's voice in his heart, clear and strong. "Noah," God said, "this rainbow is the sign of the covenant I make with you and with all living creatures. Never again will I destroy the earth with a flood. As long as the earth remains, there will be seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night. This is my promise to you and to all generations that will come after you." Noah's heart swelled with gratitude as he listened to God's words. The rainbow was a beautiful and powerful reminder of God's mercy and faithfulness. It was a symbol of the covenant between God and humanity, a promise that the earth would never again be destroyed in such a way. The sight of the rainbow filled Noah with hope for the future, a future where they could live in peace, following God's guidance. Noah turned to his family, who were also gazing at the rainbow with awe. He explained to them the significance of what they were witnessing. "This rainbow is God's promise to us," he said. "It is a sign of his mercy, a reminder that he will never again bring such a flood upon the earth. We are to live in harmony with his will, to care for the earth and all its creatures, and to be grateful for the blessings he has given us." His family nodded, understanding the importance of the covenant. They knew that they had been given a great responsibility, to rebuild the world in a way that honored God's commandments, to live with kindness, justice, and respect for all of creation. They were determined to live up to this promise, to create a world where future generations could thrive in peace and harmony. As the rainbow began to fade, Noah and his family turned their attention to the task ahead. They had a new life to build, and there was much work to be done. They began by exploring the land around them, finding places to settle, to plant crops, and to build their homes. The animals, too, began to spread out, finding their places in this new world, ready to fill the earth with life once more. Noah's heart was full as he watched his family and the animals begin their new lives. He felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that they had been chosen by God to carry on the legacy of life on earth. They had survived the flood, and now they were tasked with ensuring that the earth would never again fall into such corruption and wickedness. It was a heavy responsibility, but Noah knew that with God's guidance, they could succeed. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, as Noah and his family worked to build their new lives. They planted fields of grain, orchards of fruit trees, and gardens of vegetables. They built sturdy homes from the wood of the trees, homes that would shelter them from the elements and provide comfort. The animals flourished, multiplying and spreading out across the land, filling the world with their presence once more. Throughout it all, the memory of the rainbow remained fresh in Noah's mind. Every time he looked up at the sky and saw a rainbow, he was reminded of God's covenant, of the promise that had been made. It gave him strength and reassurance, knowing that they were not alone, that God was watching over them, guiding their steps as they rebuilt the world. One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned shades of pink and gold, Noah stood outside his home, reflecting on all that had happened. The world was different now, but it was also full of hope and promise. The earth was alive with new life, and the future stretched out before them, filled with possibilities. Noah offered a prayer of thanks, his heart overflowing with gratitude. He thanked God for his mercy, for the protection during the flood, and for the chance to begin anew. He prayed for wisdom, for strength, and for the continued guidance of God's hand as they moved forward. As he finished his prayer, Noah looked up at the sky and saw a faint rainbow forming in the distance. It was a gentle reminder of the covenant, a symbol of the unbreakable bond between God and his creation. Noah smiled, feeling a deep sense of peace and contentment. The world was new, and with it came the opportunity to live in harmony with God's will. Noah and his family had been given a great gift, the gift of a new beginning, a fresh start, and they were determined to make the most of it, to build a world that reflected the beauty and goodness of God's creation. With the rainbow as their guide, Noah and his family stepped forward into the future, ready to fulfill the promise of the covenant and to live in peace and harmony with the earth and with each other. The story of the flood had ended, but the story of their new life was just beginning, filled with hope, faith, and the unshakable promise of God's love.